Okay, everyone ready?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to start the webinar. Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar hosted by Calix with Native Network. Build it, own it, live it, the new ways tribes create sovereign broadband businesses that serve the whole community. I'm Susan Friedman from Calix. We will be starting in just a minute, so grab your coffee and get ready for an insightful conversation. Just a few quick tips and notes before we get started. This webinar is designed to be interactive, so please ask questions at any time by dropping them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the 30-minute session. The chat, also at the bottom of your screen, is open too. Please share your thoughts, reactions to the conversation. While you're at the bottom of the screen console, you can see a few resources and bios. During the webinar, we will have a few live poll questions. Thank you in advance for your participation in the polls. Your answers to these questions help us to tailor today's conversation and follow-up experiences. Today's session is being recorded, and a link with the recording will be sent to all who registered. Please share this link with your colleagues who may be interested in this discussion. And with that, I'll hand it over to Claudia Tarbell, Senior Engagement Manager with Calix. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Claudia Tarbell, Senior Engagement Manager for Tribal and Indigenous Communities and ILEX with Calix. I'm honored to co-host today's webinar with Andrew Metcalf, CEO of Native Network. Today's session, Build It, Own It, Live It, is all about exploring the many ways that tribes can create broadband solutions that are sovereign, sustainable, and community-centered. We know that every tribe is different. Some may just be starting to explore broadband, while others are already operating or partnering with other networks. But what unites us is the desire to serve our communities in a way that reflects our values and priorities. So this webinar is not about a one-size-fits-all model. It's really about understanding the range of options that you have from fully owned, tribally owned network to a managed partnership, and how each can support your goals for connectivity, economic development, and self-determination. We also recognize that while funding can help build the infrastructure, it often doesn't cover the ongoing operations, and that's really where the real challenges begin. Andy will walk us through practical strategies, real-world examples, and key decision points to help you think through what's possible for your community. With that, I'm excited to hand it over to Andy and kick off the presentation and share his insights.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. And thank you for hosting this very important webinar. This is a subset of our much larger one-on-one training that we put on at NTTA. And so we're going to go through it fairly quickly, but I think it'll highlight a lot of the things that, and hopefully bring up a lot of questions for everyone, and feel free to ask those and we'll try to get to them. So my name is Andrew Metcalf. I'm the CEO and Chief Engineer at Native Network. We have been working in the Indian country for 10 years now with the company, but have lots of experience over my 40-year career. You can see some of those milestones and facts about me on the screen. I think the biggest one is tribal affiliation, and we've been working with tribes primarily in the Northwest during my early career, and building facilities like towers and fiber, and in the early days, copper telephone systems. So a little bit of background, a lot of history in telecom and with in the Indian country. So we're going to talk about the tribal broadband landscape here first. And so the original tribal telecoms are kind of listed on there. It's a bit jumbled around there, maybe a little bit hard to see, but the Cheyenne River Sioux and Saddleback Communications and Scatui and Warm Springs, those are original telecom, tribal telecoms. Been doing this for 30 plus years. And then at the bottom, you can see active tribal ISPs and telecoms. So over the last 10 years, from our perspective, a lot of these folks are coming on. Some are relatively recent. Some have been on for a while. We're going to highlight a couple of those. I think the Tulalip tribe was one of the first we worked with, and you can see tribal Tulalip tribes, but right next to it is the Salish networks. That's their branding for their network. So you'll see a lot of times it's the tribe, but the ISP could be related, or completely take the tribe's naming convention or marketing names and such. So you see a little bit of that. The Trace Fiber Networks is the Chickasaw, and so these are the brand names for those folks for the most part.
So with that, we want to start off with our poll question number 1, just to understand who our audience is and where they are in their journey. Susan, can you launch poll question number 1? Oh, okay. I didn't see that it was already up there. So, so it looks like a lot of people are in their building and launching a network phase of everything. And then the second one is there's a lot of our audience that's already operating a broadband service, which is good as well. And then the other one is they're just starting to explore the idea, which is important as well, learning about all the nuances of owning and operating your network, or different ways to own your network is really important. So thank you to everyone who responded to the poll question. I appreciate it. Back to you, Andy.
All right, perfect. So we're going to run into, it seems like we've got a good mix there of folks, which is fairly common. We've seen a transition from folks more weighted in just learning and starting out, and now we've got a lot more that are actually operating networks, and I think this will be helpful for both the operators and the folks that are just starting out and kind of working through it. So key items getting started: researching and interviewing, talking to experts, existing tribal ISPs, vendors such as ourselves, consultants, engineering folks, legal, and kind of defining what that is, establishing the goals. What are you trying to do with this telecom company, or is it just an ISP, or do you want to provide full suite of services? Is it just trying to solve the gap between the haves and have-nots on the reservation or target area, or are you trying to be a fully functional competitor to the telephone company? So those are the things you got to talk through. Involve your stakeholders, decision makers within the tribe. Engage the tribal community. We can't I can't speak strongly enough about getting this initial engagement with these key stakeholders and tribal members to first off, let them know something's coming, you're thinking about this and going forward, but to get that feedback, which will help all the way along in your progression towards turning up these services. So everyone's engaged and excited for it and looking forward to it. So establishing your goals, right? What's your current situation, right? You got nothing. You've got some things. You've got maybe a carrier or two who's the cellular providers in the area, if there are any that have coverage. Those are going to be relationships down the road that will help on the success criteria. One thing we'll talk about here is the ISP isn't just necessarily for providing services to your members. It's also for potentially providing revenue stream and sustainability to the network, which we'll come into. So those cellular carriers and other users of network assets is important to identify up front, so you can build those into your model going forward. Part of that's done with the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's kind of a generic process. Every project goes through when you start them out, but it's very important to understand, how you fit into the current ecosystem, and you'll find out very quickly when you talk to other tribal ISPs or other ISPs in general, what are those things that could be problems for you in the future, and how will you work to mitigate those. So then another key component is find and evaluate partners. We call a dream team, right? So find the folks that have tribal experience, have good working knowledge of current capabilities of ISPs, and have the ability to work in some of rural markets primarily, those types of things. So it takes a team to complete this, and sometimes feel like you're out on your own out there, trying to solve the world's problems, but a good vendor and consultant can help you feel much better about what you're trying to do, and calm some of those initial nerves. The feasibility study, continuing on with getting started, and roadmaps and network designs. So after you kind of go through the initial, this is what we want to do, and this is like what is available to us, and how can we go about starting the process here. So feasibility studies, typically done by a consultant that takes a look at the same things you've talked about. They put the pencil to the paper and say, yes, here's all the assets that are in the area. Here's the things that you could potentially use to leverage. You don't have to build this because it already exists. And here's what a preliminary engineering might look like. Here's some of the the right-of-way issues and things you're going to come across, and understand those up front, right? And then a little bit of a network design. What is it we're trying to accomplish? So that these things will determine capitalization ready. We used to call it shovel ready, but that really was a misnomer, right? It's capitalization ready. Is your plan ready to utilize the capital that's going to be required to implement, right? Shovel ready, that's a long ways down the road, right? You got engineering completed, you've got all those things done, and you're ready to break ground. So capitalization ready is really the term that we try to focus on and get you understanding where you are in the the process here. These networks are typically 1 to 3 years to get put in place. So it's even if you had the funding today, it still takes a bit of time to get the processes worked, whether that's working with the funding provider, NTIA in most cases, and others that are available. The feasibility will identify the plan going forward. It should give you some options that you would work with the consultant to kind of narrow down, but really the feasibility study is to give you multiple options and multiple ways to do this. And we typically are calling this a roadmap when we are helping to facilitate these, because it's not really just a feasibility, it's what does the future look like, and how can you get there. Cost savings, job creation, we're trying to look at all that. How can you utilize existing folks, training, working with the Tarot folks to understand what's available, and that type of thing. And then, of course, we look at the broadband, the sovereignty and the sustainability issues, and a feasibility to kind of open your eyes as to what needs to occur. These networks, one of the biggest issues with the networks is maintaining them, after they're constructed. Who's doing that work, and who's got responsibility for that? And these are live networks, and they need care and feeding to keep up with the technology. Let's see. Own it. The formation. What does this entity look like, and what are the possibilities that it can look like, and and a lot of that starts with what are you trying to accomplish, right? The financial modeling, where's that money coming from? How much is this going to cost? What does it take to sustain your service offerings and pricing bundles? Those are important. We have, some folks that are providing the services for free and using different funding mechanisms to offset those. We've got, pricing models that are, whether they're low cost options or that type of thing. And then what are those service options you're trying to provide? Straight internet, or are you trying to add some value adds to that to increase, we call it ARPU, which stands for, revenue per user. And that's kind of a standard metric. And you'll see that a lot when working in the models. Operations, staffing, software, all of that, identify all that those costs and plans on using. We're addressing sustainability, right? Critical. Regulatory and compliance. There's different models require different levels of compliance, and you'll see that here in a minute. Try to identify those network and maintenance costs going forward in the future, right? Typically, we see where we put maintenance on some of these networks and we bought, great maintenance and support, and it was a 3-year deal, and guess what? We're now in year 4. What happens, right? How do we, did we plan for funding of that, support for that equipment and things along the line? Did we plan for whether pole attachments, pole leasing, all those things that have residual costs going into the future? I guess that falls into the and more. All righty, let's see here. Entity types that can fulfill the requirements, right there. So there's multiple different versions of telecommunications companies out there. We've kind of highlighted the ones in green are the 2, but I'll talk briefly about the others. The base internet service provider just plan to provide internet. Sometimes they add an act or a letter on there for the type of service provider. In this case, WISP, which is a wireless ISP. But there's different things, and then sometimes sometimes referred to as CSP, content service providers, things along those lines. So you'll see a few different names for those. Utility, those are typically the regulated tribal utility commissions want to be the control point for the network. Sometimes these are regulated by the state utility, which is not desirable in some cases, and in some cases it's an individual case basis. I think Claudia said it best. Not every tribe is the same. We like to say if you've met one tribe, you've met one tribe, because they're all different, even though they have similar backgrounds and requirements. They all are a little bit different, and each state they're in has different requirements and things along those lines. So we'll leave the right hand for later, but interconnected VoIP provider, that's a status type of provider you can become, which allows you to run regulated voice services without all the hassle. So you work with an existing competitive local exchange carrier, which you'll see on the right hand side, work with them to utilize their authority and regulations, but you control numbers and things like that that are important to the tribe. We own our own block of numbers. This is us. This is how you recognize us. Area code / this particular NXX or the next 3 numbers in the series. Let's see, eligible telecommunication carrier. So this is a status that is typically desirable once you become, do the initial work of an ISP, adding this on, which allows you to then be registered with the state or typically the federal government to provide the Lifeline affordable connectivity program, which doesn't exist at the moment, but hopefully that comes back into play. So you get subsidies for the network, which is key to sustainability to take advantage of those, but it does require some work and regulatory work on the backside to attain that certification. So So those are the types of service providers that you can work through, but you also have the ability to become some of the ones on the right-hand side, very regulated type services, but some cases it might make sense. The incumbent local exchange carrier, we've seen tribes that become, take over for the existing carrier and become that incumbent. That has a lot of requirements that come with it. You got to serve everyone. You can't leave anyone out. So it's a little more onerous, but sometimes it makes sense. Carrier of last resort is a similar to the ILEC, means you're the only one that can provide services in those areas. So you're eligible for subsidies and things, but meaning you have to provide the service. And then rural local exchange is very similar to incumbent, but typically limited to smaller communities exchanges. Subsidies can be higher for that because of the rural nature. Competitive local exchange, there on the bottom right, is the one we typically have dealt with over the years, which gives you the ability to be on par with the incumbent exchange, be able to access their fiber and conduit and assets and things like that, where it might make sense in some cases to do that. We're finding that an ISP with an interconnected VoIP status on there and ETC is really kind of the sweet spot there. Any questions on that before we move on?
No questions in the chat yet.
We're going to talk about the different types of operating scenarios now. So I've highlighted 3. They happen to be customers of ours, so it's easier for us to talk about and deal with. But this is basically, I mentioned the Tulalip tribes. They created the Salish Networks brand. They basically wanted to do everything themselves. So we did a project with them to help them come up to speed, understand everything. They actually became a CLEC because that was the kind of the going thing when this was formed, and this was formed early on. So, 8 or 9 years ago. So they've been in operation. But here's the things you got as a do-it-yourself, do-it-all. You got to worry about the people, the software, the vehicles, the regulatory compliance, operating budget, additional capital to refresh equipment. The pros, you got complete telecom sovereignty. You're not reliant on anyone to run the network. More ability to create jobs on the reservation. You get all revenue and profitability are internal to the entity, whether that's the LLC or whatever was formed to take advantage of that. The cons are, you got to find and retain employees or telecom experts that can live on reservation or be full-time to this company. Can get expensive. Just having those experts at your fingertips to be able to do, you got IP engineering, you've got maybe wireless engineering, you got fiber, outside plant fiber folks. All those folks have to be available and ready to work. Not to mention, finance and billing and service, customer service folks and installers in the field and all of that stuff. So it can strain your resources, if you don't have enough revenue and budget to support that. There's a wide variety where some tribes have thousands of customers, some tribes have hundreds of customers, and when you start getting down into hundreds of customers, it becomes more difficult to acquire the expertise and capabilities that's required to run a state-of-the-art ISP. So that's a do-it-yourself. There's everything that you need to know everything, and you need to be able to fund that to do that. Secondly, that we've got the Pasquiyaki tribe in Tucson. This is a managed ISP. We use the tribe's brand, which we helped develop and put together the marketing packages and that type of thing. But they rely on us as a third party to provide the people and software. So they use an aggregated model of they have access to state-of-the-art software, but it's limited to just the portions they need to run their services. They have full access to everything, the data and the ability to make modifications and things like that. We're working with them hand in hand to provide this service. They typically have the folks on the ground, so you got control of the operating budget, and you still require the capital, right? So typically, the grant is funding the required equipment and construction that still is owned and belongs to the tribe. The entity, the managed ISP, is running that network and providing the services and that type of thing. And there's typically a ground component, somebody, a handful of folks at the tribe that is doing installations and eyes and hands type functionality, where it keeps the cost down of having somebody permanently stationed on the reservation or in that particular area. And we provide remote support, manage the network operations center, the call centers for taking complaints, engineering, all 5 disciplines of engineering, RF, OSP, and IP engineering and such. And so that's that. So the cons are you're dependent on a third party, to help. The final model that we advocate for or can provide is the ISP partner ISP brand. So you can maintain the branding, or you can have a third party such as Native Network be the brand and provide those services. And it's typically you got the initial capital, and then you got a capital refresh, but the ISP is a third party and operates that entity. So it's low financial risk. You don't need to create new entities or business units. The revenue from broadband infrastructure is set, and profit sharing is the typical way that happens. So when the ISP makes money, that the tribe makes money, and that works very well for smaller entities that don't have the capability. So those are 3 options. There's kind of a kicker there on the bottom. It's wholesale open access, right? So managing that network and letting other ISPs come in and provide services to the tribe. So the tribe has the infrastructure and manages the ISPs that come in and use that. It's a little bit different model, but you still typically need somebody to manage the ISPs. How are they getting access? All of the capabilities of the network that are transitioned over. So
we have one question. It says, how many of these rely on other ISPs for DIA access?
So DIA is typically, we don't advocate using an ISP for the DIA. We advocate for using a tier 1 or tier 2 internet provider, which could be classified as an ISP, but really is classified as a wholesale internet provider. And we advocate for that because they're more sophisticated. You operate your own IP addressing schemes with those folks, and it just works much better. Your local ISP, you're not in competition with your local ISP that way. In some cases, they may be the only one to get internet from, or at a minimum, they may be a backup connection for your network. So really, physically, where are you located and what are the assets? Which, of course, the feasibility study will tell you that what is available in your area, what would it cost if you need to get additional funding to build middle mile, which is the middle mile network is basically from the reservation to a point of presence where you can acquire wholesale internet that then you provide to your customers downstream. Hopefully that answers the question.
So that rolls us into our next poll question. I think this is really good information because a lot of times, the tribe might not have enough households on territory to actually support a owned and operated model. So need to get creative in how they're going to, provide services. But I think what's really important is tribes not sign over their infrastructure to anyone, but definitely work through this process that Native Network has laid out to make sure that you're taking ownership in some way, shape, or form, to make sure that you still remain in control of something. So I really appreciate all this information that you're doing, Andy. And I know we're at time for everyone that's on the call. We just got a little bit more information to get through. But the poll question came back. 50% really want to do it yourself, tribally owned and operated. The next one is 22% are still reviewing their options and working through that. 17 are looking at like a managed ISP model, and then others are looking at an external ISP model coming through. So thank you guys for answering those questions.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to speed it up.
I have one question. Is there a feasibility template that is available? Feasibility plan template that's available?
We do have worksheets for that that can be provided. Basically, it's a questionnaire that you walk through and kind of answer as much of the questions as you can before you know, and in some cases you may not need a feasibility if you know all the answers to those questions. But typically we're not finding that. But there is, yes, a worksheet to get you started.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, can move on to the next part. Try
All
to
right,
get
so
this quickly for everyone.
yep, super quick. It takes a lot of things happening for even the smallest of ISPs. So we list, some of the partners that you may work with directly or through what we call, an aggregator that can provide these services, typically at lower cost because we're sharing the cost among all of our customers, and we're managing that platform down. So it's isolated to, as far from a data sovereignty aspect, and but we get the benefit of cost sharing. So the functions: provisioning, meaning turning up services. How does that happen, automatically or manually? Support and maintenance. Billing: are you billing or are you not billing the services? And taxing and regulatory compliance. Collection and payment gateways. Those all have to be set up and going. Service offerings. We talked a little bit about this. Internet VoIP is voice over IP, which is typically the way voice is done these days for any new entity. Office 365, Azure, those are cloud services. We can refer to them as cloud. There's lots of different cloud services available that can be set up and sold down, to your customers, adding to revenue per user, which is where we, which really helps with sustainability. Circuits and transport, that's things like how do I get, if somebody wants a gigabit connection onto the reservation to serve, an entity there, whether that's tribal or non-tribal entity, you can handle those, and do you offer those, and can you provide those? Mobility, which is, cellular, private LTE services, standard resell of the big carriers, and then security options, cybersecurity options, and things like that. So there's a lot of services that you can add-ons that you can do depending on your expertise and your comfort. But these are kind of the major ones that we and we provide these that same way on an aggregated basis. So you're not having to put in, complete systems to support these. You can get them not only from us, but from others, and only pay for the services that you're actually selling down through. Does that make sense? I think we're going to talk about software needs. You guys can read the list. It's long, and a lot of software does multiple components of this, but these are the things you got to look for and make sure that you've got a solution for. to make things much easier. Take online customer sign up. That's basically customer can come in, sign up for a service, change their billing status or all those things to keep the calls from coming in and having to be answered and then processed. So all these things are work together to help you streamline your ISP to then help with sustainability in the future. Without these, it becomes very, very difficult to run on a spreadsheet or old accounting systems and things like that. So billing, collection, monitoring of the network. How do you know when it's having problems up and down? Customer care self-portal. We talked a little bit about that in the online customer sign up. Managed Wi-Fi, parental controls, cybersecurity as different things products that you want to sell. And then mapping and regulatory, you have compliance issues no matter what. You've got to file with the government on who's online, who's using the services and things along those lines. So it's not super difficult, but without the software, it becomes very difficult to manage. All right, people, operations managers, outside plant, senior telecom, network engineers, field technicians, network operations, center technicians, installation coordinators, all of that. We obviously recommend cross-training for smaller ISPs so they can do multiple jobs, but these are all roles that have to be fulfilled by somebody. Third-party aggregated system, you can outsource a lot of that stuff and get help for that you need. If you're becoming a fully, even a fully owned, supported ISP, tribally owned ISP, needs some outsourced help, on occasion, whether that's engineering and planning or help with new construction outside plant. So these are just the jobs that are kind of highlighted of things that it takes to run a telecom ISP. So in-house versus outsourced, we talked a little bit about that already, but proprietary telecom software, brand development, marketing, advertising, web and social media, communications, these are all things that, can be outsourced, get different roles. I'm not going to talk about each one, but you can see, there's a lot of different things happening. And you can pick and choose whether to handle those in-house and buy the software and run them, or use third party to help manage these cloud solutions, things like that. So a lot to think about. Network infrastructure. If you have towers, who's going to climb those towers? Who's going to maintain those? Who's going to take care of the regulatory compliance and things along those lines, which all things to think about. And then more on the business side, HR, payroll, regulatory, funding, all those good things that have to be.
I think what's important to look at here is, the different entities that are already set up. Is there like certain things that the tribe can take on that they do on a day-to-day basis and work with them? Is there another tribally owned business that's set up that, takes on some of these roles as well that they do on a day-to-day basis that you can use as on a part-time basis, because full-time employees cost a lot of money. And so, like, to start up lean, look at all of the resources that you have available in the tribe and start pulling them together. With
It's
that,
part of a feasibility study that you should
Yep.
be working on up front. It's how are we going to handle these things, in the end. It might be a year or two from now, but to think about them now and start developing those relationships, intertribal and accounting is one that we've seen a lot that gets handled by the tribe's accounting department, which
Yep.
sometimes can be effective.
So Susan, can you pull up the poll question number 4? And then Andy, I will let you know the questions that we have. So Rick asked, if your ISP is an ILEC territory, can you still subscribe to a tier 2 service provider if the last mile is owned by the ILEC for a DIA service?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you do in that case, if you didn't have another connection, is you would buy a non-internet connection. It would be a VLAN or a wave service, things along those lines, and then that would connect to a tier 2. So you're buying it's basically two components at that point. You got to pay the incumbent, and then you pay for the internet. But still, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a better solution doing that than buying the DIA directly from your incumbent.
Okay. And then I have another question. It says, what are you seeing the deployment of IoT, Internet of Things devices management market in the new tribal operated markets?
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite subjects. We go on forever, but we call it the smart reservation, smart city, translated to smart reservation. We see a lot of that's a huge opportunity upcoming for managing. One example is we've got one tribe that's got wellheads all over the place, and would be too expensive to build fiber optic connections out to manage these. So they're using a wireless network and IoT. It's a combination of SCADA, which is a very expensive solution. Combine that with IoT or industrial IoT to provide that service, and that's something that the tribal ISP can sell and manage, right, for other tribal entities, so internal. So we always recommend that the tribal ISP, is just like any other business. You sell the products even if it's internal to tribe, so you can show the value of the ISP. But a lot of times it gets muddied over when the ISP is just providing a service. Everyone forgets that it does cost money and people and energy to provide these services. So that's one thing we do recommend, is that the money is tracked very closely to show the value of the tribal ISP to the tribe. But yes, that is an up and coming product set. It's actually being deployed pretty widely, and we've got some very good working examples of that.
That's all we have. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. We know that building a broadband network is really just one part of the journey. Making sure that you keep it running, make it sustainable, and ensuring it reflects your community values is really where the real work begins. What we hope you take away today is that there are options. Whether your tribe is exploring right now, building, or already operating, there's always a path forward that can be tailored to your needs. And you don't have to do it alone. Like Andy said, there are partners and resources that are ready to support you. I just want to do a heartfelt thank you to Andy Metcalf and the Native Network team for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and commitment to helping tribes navigate through this journey. Your insights today have been very valuable, so thank you. And thank you everyone on the call for joining today and also for staying over. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.